In 1785, Captain Nathaniel Portlock and his crew came across a beautiful Alaskan bay located on the Kenai Peninsula. The bay and surrounding woods were teeming with natural resources such as wild game, salmon and other fish, and shellfish. On the shoreline, they also came across an abandoned indigenous village and couldn't comprehend why anyone would leave such a place. However, not long after they settled there, paranoia began to sweep through the community like the heavy fog that came down from the mountains. The nights were filled with horrific screams that echoed through the trees and across the bay, and many of Portlock's men began to fall ill with mysterious diseases. The crew begged and begged their captain to abandon this place. Eventually he gave in, leaving behind whatever was watching them from the trees and his name on the place. Portlock, Alaska. What is up, YouTube? My name is Trinity, and welcome to my channel, or welcome back if you've been here before. Today we are going to be talking about a very famous Alaskan ghost town called Portlock, Alaska, also known as Port Chatham. This town was formerly abandoned in 1950, and the reasons for it was economic decline in the salmon canning industry, which was the main economic driver of Portlock when it was a thriving community, as well as construction of the Route 1 highway that connected the Kenai Peninsula to mainland Alaska, which created a lot more opportunities for people that wanted to relocate to the mainland. However, many residents of Portlock and their descendants, who many of them happen to be indigenous Alaskans from the Yupik group of people, they tell a far different reason for abandoning Portlock. They claim that in the woods surrounding Portlock and its bay lives an intelligent but very dangerous creature they refer to as the Nantinak, or the Hairy Man. Now, the earliest written reference to this creature dates back to the 1700s in European expedition logs. However, it is a very old legend passed down through oral tradition. Physically, it's said to be extremely similar to what we think of as the Sasquatch. Humanoid, about 8 feet tall, and covered in thick, dark hair. Apparently, it's rare to actually see them. However, people often know they're there by the odor that they give off, which is very pungent, as well as the howls and screams that they let out. How it differs from your typical Bigfoot legend is that it is believed to be a spiritual being. It's more supernatural, and it possesses supernatural powers. It's inherently evil and very dangerous, and it brings death and destruction and disease. Now, the beginning of the story of the modern town of Portlock begins in 1867 when a group of Sugpiaq indigenous people also came into the area. Now, side note, as I was researching, I came across a couple different names that the Sugpiaq go by, also known as Alutik or Aleut, which is the Russian pronunciation. But if you are more knowledgeable and I get anything wrong, please correct me down in the comments below. Now, just like Portlock's crew and a Spanish crew that had visited the area 6 years before Portlock did, they were overwhelmed by the beauty and bounty of the area. And they couldn't believe that no one had made this place their home, so they decided to. They thought that with so many resources, they wouldn't have to worry about struggling through the winter because there were so many different things they could rely on. However, only a month into establishing this community, they began running into serious problems. Just like the groups that had attempted to settle there before, people began falling ill, and there was just a paranoia in the air. Screams all throughout the night in the woods, and just a feeling of being watched. And then one night, their village was raided by cannibalistic giants. Sometimes these creatures, when game became scarce, would raid the village nightly, and the people that would witness these attacks on the village would note how brutal and savage these creatures were. The Sugpiaq tried to fight back and defend themselves, but by 1905, they completely abandoned the community they had built. 16 years later, though, a group of indigenous Russian Alutik people also came upon the Portlock area. And like every group before them, they were amazed by the bounty of the place, and they saw potential. They established a salmon cannery, as well as a school and a post office, and from there, the community grew. Early on, however, strict rules were implemented, such as a nightly curfew and armed guards patrolling the community, taking special interest in both the salmon cannery and the school. Another rule was that nobody was to enter the forest. Now, I am not very familiar with Alutiiq culture or customs. A simple Google search told me that their diet consists heavily of marine animals such as fish, shellfish, and marine mammals. However, they do also eat venison as well as plants like berries and roots. So it does seem strange to me that an area where some traditional food sources would be very abundant is completely off limits without a good reason. But over time, as the community grew, these rules loosened. In 1931, a logger named Andrew Kamluck took his dogs and some logging equipment into the woods in order to harvest some wood. However, when he didn't return, a search party was sent out after him. His dogs, which had been used to help him haul this heavy logging equipment into the woods, were found first and had apparently been torn apart by a very vicious animal attack of some sort. When searchers found Kamluck's body, however, it seemed less like an animal attack. He died, most likely instantly, from severe head trauma after being bashed over the head with his own logging equipment. Now, while I couldn't find the exact type of machinery that it was, the note that it took several dogs to haul it into the forest implies that he could not carry it himself, and that it was too heavy for a human to reasonably pick up. And Andrew Kamluck's death seemed to open the floodgates on the tragedies that Portlock would experience. Several hunters were in the woods tracking a moose when they came across some very large, strange footprints. They were very humanoid in appearance, except they were over 18 inches in length. And the spacing of the tracks made it look like this creature was moving bipedally. They were very unnerved by this, but decided to continue on their hunt. Eventually, they came across a clearing where there was a lot of flattened grass and an obvious violent struggle had happened. There was blood everywhere. Along with the moose tracks that led them to this area of a struggle, they also found that the strange footprints from earlier in their hunt also converged on this area. And beyond this area where some sort of struggle happened, only the humanoid footprints continued up the trail and up into the mountains. Now, for reference, moose are very big. A female moose is between 600 to 1,000 pounds and can be 5 to 6 feet at the shoulder. A bull moose is even larger, between 1,000 to 1,400 pounds, and can be up to 7 feet at the shoulder, meaning that whatever had killed the moose that they were tracking had also been capable of carrying its kill uphill into the mountains. People also just went missing in the woods. Apparently, a gold prospector went into the woods and never returned, as well as hunters that went out to hunt bears and Dall sheep. No trace of them was left behind. It was like they just vanished. Elders in Portlock insisted that the official number of people that went missing in Portlock over its short lifespan was much lower than the actual number of people that disappeared. Now, in official records, 15 people had gone missing from Portlock over the span of its existence. But even if we stick to that conservative number that many say is too low, Portlock was not a large community. At its height in the late 1920s, it only had about 150 residents. So doing a bit of rough math, 10% of the population went missing, and that is not counting the murders and mysterious deaths that happened. Allegedly, the bodies of some of these missing people began to wash up on the shore of the bay. People assumed that these bodies had come from the mountains and were washed into the bay from the streams. Many of them showed signs of some sort of animal attack with bites and scratches all over them. Though apparently one of the bodies that they assumed was one of the men that had gone missing months prior was unidentifiable because of the extent of his injuries. Locals said that the state this body was in was beyond what a bear was capable of doing. Now, for reference, brown bears are native to the Kenai Peninsula, specifically a subspecies called Kodiak bears that have been separated from mainland grizzly bear populations for about 12,000 years. Because of the abundance of food on the Kenai Peninsula and the wider Kodiak archipelago, they've become a lot bigger than mainland grizzlies due to something called insular gigantism, which is an evolutionary trend like insular dwarfism that can occur in isolated populations. For context, a large male grizzly bear may weigh about 800 pounds and be about 8 feet tall when they rear up on their hind legs, whereas a male Kodiak bear can weigh nearly double that at 1,500 pounds and be up to 10 feet tall. Now, I know after a point, it doesn't really matter because if either attacks you, you are unfortunately probably dead. But what I am saying is the locals are saying the damage inflicted on this body was outside of the capabilities of the largest subspecies of brown bears that are native to the area. Apparently, the woods were not the only place where the Nantinak would roam. A man named Tom Larson, who was the owner of Portlock's sawmill, was in the woods harvesting wood for some fish traps. From where he was standing, he could easily see the beach and the wider bay. And he said that he saw one of these creatures walking along the beach. He said it was large and hairy, and knowing how dangerous that these creatures were, he said as quietly as he could, he ran back to his cabin to grab a rifle, and he went back to where he had initially saw it. And when he raised his rifle to take a shot at it, it looked right at him as if it had always known he was there. Now, later on, when telling this story to other people, he said that for some reason he was just unable to pull the trigger, that something prevented him from doing it. A woman named Milena Helen Kell, who was the oldest resident of the neighboring Nanwalek community, was actually born in Portlock in 1934. But her family left the village when she was still a baby. According to her, her parents told her that it wasn't just one incident that caused them to move out of Portlock. In reality, it was just tragic incident after tragic incident that the community attributed to the Nantinak. One of these incidents being the death of her godfather in 1931. He was by himself on the beach working on a boat when something came up behind him and hit him over the head with a winch, killing him instantly. The village was totally abandoned by 1950. That's when the post office closed its doors permanently. However, most residents relocated through the 1940s either to Port Graham or to Nanwalek. The abandonment of Portlock, however, did not bring an end to the terror that the Nantinak brought. In 1968, a hunter claimed that he was stalked by the creature in the woods surrounding Portlock as he was hunting some goats. He said he was overcome with the feeling of being watched, even though he couldn't see anything around him, but eventually he began to smell a very pungent odor as whatever it was closed in on him. And eventually he was scared out of the woods entirely when it began to scream and make other noises as it chased him. In 1973, a storm over the neighboring Dogfish Bay caused 3 hunters in the area to take shelter in the remnants of Portlock. Throughout the night, the hunters said that they could hear something circling their camp. It had very heavy and bipedal sounding footsteps, and that it would make grunting and growling noises from the darkness. Now, all of these stories are terrifying. I couldn't find a lot of newspapers or other reputable sources to back up any of it, but that makes sense because it was a very small, isolated community, and it was a very long time ago, so it probably took a lot of time for stories like this to travel from very remote places. And honestly, I kind of like that. Indigenous cultures around Turtle Island or North America, we relied a lot on oral tradition. I am generalizing. I'm not saying that nobody had written language, but oral tradition was definitely more heavily used. So even though some of these stories happened less than 100 years ago, the storytelling aspect and the lack of actual written documentation, it makes it feel like a timeless legend. Now, do I believe all of it? Probably not. I'm definitely someone who is open to the idea of something like Bigfoot existing as far as the supernatural stuff. I'm not totally sure. I'm not going to say it's definitely not real because I don't know. But even when we zoom out and look at the facts of what we know about Portlock, such as people moving away from Portlock into neighboring villages or to mainland Alaska due to the construction of Alaska Route 1 and a downturn in the salmon canning industry, many small villages around the Kenai Peninsula were also abandoned. So why would the people of Portlock specifically say that the reason that they abandoned their village was not because they were looking for opportunities elsewhere, but because they were experiencing something so horrific. If all of this was completely ordinary, why cite this pre-colonization story, this legend, as to the reason why you left this place? To my knowledge, no other abandoned communities said that the reason they left was because of something driving them out. I also couldn't find anything that would indicate that the residents that abandoned the village benefited financially or otherwise in telling these stories. I know a couple of years ago, a special called Alaskan Killer Bigfoot covering Portlock came out. So I can understand like if people were paid then, but in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, I doubt people were being paid to tell these stories, especially about such a small community. I can't imagine like back then monster hunters were going out there and paying people for their testimony. So what is the motive if there isn't some truth in the stories? But I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. What do you think truly happened in Portlock, Alaska? What drove the people out of their community? Was it really just mundane circumstances and people just wanting to tell stories? Or do you think something else was going on? Or do you think there was something totally separate from all of this that also could have contributed to them abandoning their village? And finally, for my favorite comment of the previous video, this one comes from Chad Hicks 8563. He says, quote, "This sounds very peculiar and you bring up some very valid points. I can't believe the group would let him go on by himself. At least one other person from the group should have went with him. I'm a master scuba diver and I've been on 13 expeditions around the world cage diving with great white sharks. I've been on safaris too, and one of the first rules is that you never dive or go off on your own, period. I really enjoy your content and hard work. Thank you." And first, Chad, I want to say thank you for leaving that incredibly kind comment. I think it is so cool that you have been on safaris and you've gone cage diving with sharks. And those are all things that I want to do some point in my life. So thank you for sharing that with me. And yes, I totally agree. I don't understand why Jim McGrogan's friends would allow him to go off on his own. And I really appreciate that your own unique experiences were able to be applied to the story so you could give your own unique perspective. Oh my God, while editing, I realized that I forgot to record the shout out for the very first person that actually chose to donate to my Buy Me a Coffee platform. That person is Sam I Am, who is a regular commenter and overall supporter of the channel. Thank you so much for choosing to be my first supporter on Buy Me a Coffee. I really appreciate it. Not only did they make a donation, but it's going to be a monthly donation, which is so generous, especially with how tough things are getting nowadays. I really appreciate that you think I deserve a monthly donation from you and that you want to put that towards my channel and my content. And I really do appreciate it. It is going to help me get content out in the future because I won't have to worry so much about other things in my personal life. I can focus more on just making the content for you guys. Hey spooky people, thank you so much for making it to the end of this video. If you're interested in ways to support the channel, the best ways are always to like, leave a comment, and even share with a friend if you think they'd enjoy my content as well. Tapping that subscribe button like Mothman's Booty is also a great way to show support, and be sure to click that notification bell so you never miss an upload. I have a Buy Me a Coffee now in case you guys would like to donate and follow for any posts and updates for the channel. Donations are never expected but always appreciated, and people that donate will get a shout out in the following video. Be sure to check out my Etsy if you enjoy my spooky artwork and would like to buy any in the form of stickers. And if you have a personal spooky story that you'd like me to read in a future video, be sure to send it over to spookychickstories@gmail.com. All of that and my other social media platforms will be listed on my link tree that will be found in the description below, just so you can find everything all in one place. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye!